Hi, it's Alistair McIntyre at Electric Scotland. I'm doing this video because I've just listened to a podcast from these islands. This is one where they're basically saying that the UK has a lot to offer. I must confess that I think that they're missing things. They're talking about common defence, common standards and stuff like that. But to be honest, I think there's a lot more to being in the UK than anyone's really saying out there. I mean, this is opposed to being an independent Scotland. I can tell you personally, I was brought up overseas. And I went to boarding school in Scotland. All my holidays were spent out in the Middle East and various other places. So when I left boarding school, I went into an accountancy firm in Scotland to become an accountant. That was the idea. And I spent 3 years at that, and I must confess I didn't really enjoy it that much. And I thought, this really isn't for me, and maybe I need to do something different. So I had a look around, and I thought maybe sales would be where I could go. But I wasn't sure should I go into direct sales or retail sales. So I applied for a job with Marks and Spencer's and British Home Stores. And in fact, British Home Stores offered me a trainee management position. But when I accepted, they then said, glad to have you, and would like you to report to our store in Coventry in Warwickshire. And I went, ah. So if I wanted the job, I had to go to Coventry. So I wanted the job, so I went to Coventry. But I didn't join British Home Stores specifically to go down to Coventry or England or anything. I really thought I'd get a job in Scotland, but that wasn't the case. So I then spent a total of 5 years based in Coventry, but only about 9 months or so was I with British Home Stores, because while I learned a lot, I didn't really feel that was the job for me. So I think at the time I was earning something like £1,300 a year, and I saw, and I was a smoker back in those days, I might add, but I saw Gallagher's advertising for trainee salespeople, and they're offering a starting salary of £1,450, which obviously is quite an increase over my £1,300, plus a company car, and of course you got free sample smokes. So I thought, wow, what a wonderful job, and a big increase in salary and company car, that's brilliant. So I applied, got the job, and I spent a couple of years with them. I had a wonderful time. But one of the real benefits of that job was that I actually travelled all over England. I mean, apart from perhaps the southeast of England, I didn't really go down that far. I went to Oxford, Cambridge area, and London, but I didn't go further afield than that. And I went down Devon, Cornwall, all of Wales, Somerset, Devon, Cornwall. Then I went up to Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle. I was in Carlisle. So I'd literally been pretty much over all of England and Wales. And I have to say, I just had a wonderful time. I can't ever really remember anything come up about me being Scottish or not Scottish. The only time maybe someone might mention something is, obviously they knew I was Scottish, but the only time it ever was mentioned when we had the England-Scotland football game. That was about the only time it ever raised its head, and it didn't really raise it much at all. But I tell you, there's parts of England and Wales that are just fantastic. I mean, the scenery is wonderful. They've got rugged scenery, they've got beautiful fields and everything. I mean, the castles down there were they weren't ruined castles down there, they were real castles. I had a wonderful time down there. The people were great, I loved it. When I left Gallagher's, I then joined Hill Samuel, the merchant bank, in their pensions, life assurance unit trust organisation, and then I joined Legal and General to do pensions, capital transfer tax, pensions, all that kind of stuff. And it was only because my father had a heart attack, and obviously I took time up to go up to see him in hospital and that's when I discovered my mother was losing her sight. And frankly, they both looked pretty damn miserable, I have to say. And I just decided I'm coming back to Scotland to look after them. And that's what I did, and I got a job with Carnation Foods and became the area sales manager for Scotland with a team of 6 salespeople. But looking back at my 5 years there in England, I just loved the place. And I also thought the pub trade was particularly great because, to be honest, in Scotland I found that a lot of the pubs you went to were hard drinking pubs. Instead of a pint and a short, for example, you'd be drinking that kind of thing, and there was never really any food in most of the pubs you went to. Of course, that's now changed. But at the time in England, I mean, Sunday at the pub was always great because you could read the Sunday newspapers while you're having a pint in the pub, and it was obviously a very mixed scene, as many women as men in the pub, and the social scene was absolutely was delightful down there. And so I just thought, this is great. Now, later on in life, I started my own business, and I did trade with England, sold services and products into England. But I have to say that none of that did I consider to be exports, because after all, the UK is a single country, and it was just as easy to sell to an English company as it was a Scottish company. And as I've been looking at this discussion about independence in Scotland, I've always loved history. And as I've delved deeper into history, I've just learned so much. For example, the Union of the Crowns, the Union of the Parliaments. One of the things about that period is that that's when Scotland had the Enlightenment. It was not long after that we had the Enlightenment period, where the Scots travelled literally all over the world and were probably the most successful race in history almost, Now, I think the thing I'm really trying to say is that if you look at the stats for today, these are government statistics, some 800,000 Scots that were born in Scotland are now living and working in the rest of the UK, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, most in England, I will say. Now that's more than the population of Glasgow or Edinburgh. I mean, that's an awful lot of Scots born in Scotland that are now living and working in the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, are they like me? They applied to join a company and were transferred down to England because that's where the work was? I really don't know. All I do know is that why would you move down to England unless there was an advantage for you to do so? Like you got a job in England where you couldn't get it in Scotland, or you got a better job, more highly paid in England than you can get in Scotland. I mean, if there was no advantage in going to England other than job security, better salaries, stuff like that, then why would you go? Well, I have to say that I just think there are so many Scots that also go to England to visit family and friends, and they know England very well indeed. And I mean, a lot of English come up to Scotland. We're all one country in the United Kingdom. I mean, every area, for example, in North Wales, I felt they were a bit cold because they liked to talk in the Welsh language. And of course, I didn't understand Welsh. And so it was quite difficult. I mean, they all could speak English, don't get me wrong. But if you're in a bit of a crowd or in a shop or something, and they're all chatting away in Welsh, you have to somehow say, excuse me, could I just have a quick word? But certainly South Wales and West Wales, the people there were just phenomenal. They were great. I mean, I loved the place there. In fact, I can tell you the working men's clubs in South Wales were better than some of the top nightclubs in London. Just extraordinary. I love Wales a lot. Now, when it comes down to being in the UK, to me it's just the fact that we're all one country. We all more or less speak the same language. We have the same currencies. You know, we don't need passports to go back and forward or anything. It's free movement. We can go where we want. And of course, if you look again in history, there was something like 132 Scots that actually represented English constituencies in the Parliament. I mean, that's quite amazing. I often wonder how many Scots are actually calling themselves English today, because way back in the 15th century, there was a way Scots could become English if they wished, and apparently a whole pile of them did. There's a lot of Stuarts that are actually English rather than Scottish. So again, if you just look at our history, and I say, the benefit of being in the United Kingdom for Scotland after the Union of the Crowns was simply that up to that point, because we're always fighting each other, the English wouldn't allow the Scots to trade in their international trading nations. So as soon as we became one nation, the Scots were then allowed to do trade in India and all over. You probably heard of the Darien scheme. I mean, the reason for the Darien scheme was because the English wouldn't allow us to trade in any parts of the world where they had influence. And so this was a chance to get our own independent trading nation going. Unfortunately, it failed, because both Spain and England were, shall we say, they were pretty against Scotland getting this Darien scheme going. So they put a lot of obstacles in our way, and in the end, of course, Darien failed. But because Darien failed, almost half the Scots had invested in the Darien scheme, so we lost a huge amount of money, virtually bankrupt as a country. But because we had the Union of the Crowns then, I mean, there was some repatriation of money from the rest of the UK into Scotland, which helped a bit. But because we were now allowed to trade, our Scots merchants just went out there and did a phenomenal job. And that's why from that time onwards, Scotland really made it big in the world. I mean, we'd always been in the world, don't get me wrong, we'd always travel, we were great travellers. And of course we fought all over the world, especially throughout Europe and so forth. But you know, to me, now I'm living in Canada, but I've been working in the USA as well. And I have to say that when I look at the United Kingdom from the point of view of trading in America and Canada, the UK's got a big presence, because we have a lot of what they call soft power. I mean, we're one of the permanent members of the Security Council, one of the 5 permanent members there. That alone gives you a lot. Then basically we are the largest armed force in Europe. I mean, I think the Scandinavian countries look to the UK for basic defence. But I mean, we are almost a defence force for Europe. Yet Europe really isn't that interested. I mean, for example, we still spend 2% or even more on our armed forces, and that's the agreement we had with being in NATO. And because of that, we're actually paying our way, because not only does that give good defence for Europe, but it also gives a lot of help to international countries around the world, where we can actually step up and play an important role in defending democracy and law. But that's this United Kingdom. And of course, tons of Scots joined the British Army and fought all over the world, quite literally. So I think, and again, if you think about it, I mean, Scotland still has its own laws, still has its own education system, has its own independent church. I mean, we have a lot of stuff that we can decide what to do ourselves in Scotland. And that's as it should be. I mean, devolved powers, I think, are good. But that doesn't mean to say we need to take charge of absolutely everything, because some things might be better on a UK-wide basis. rather than just parochial in Scotland, because Scotland could diverge and therefore cause a lot of problems for the rest of the UK. And we want to avoid that. It's simply that England shouldn't make a law that would disadvantage Scotland. But the thing is, in any union is voluntarily a union, because we could leave the union, and we voted not to leave the union, the only referendum we've had on Scottish independence. But to be perfectly honest with you, I feel as close to people in England as I do people in Scotland. So, I just don't understand this need to be an independent country. I mean, all over the world people recognise Scotland. As I say, I'm in Canada right now, and I tell you, the Scots should be mightily proud of Canada, because the Scots in Canada, I mean, we're about 15% of the population. But I tell you this much, we put far more than about 15% into Canada. I mean, it was because of the Scots that Canada got Confederation. And the first Prime Minister after Confederation was John A. Macdonald, a Scot. And if you look through the history of Canada, Scots played an enormous role in every aspect, as merchants with the Hudson Bay Company, which is the most massive organisation in the world ever. But not only that, we were great scientists, educators. I mean, there's hardly a university around or schools around where a Scot isn't on the board. Are actually funded the institution. I mean, what the Scots have done in the war is just amazing. Yeah, a lot of Scots, I mean, like, I'm now a Canadian citizen as well as being a UK citizen, because you can keep dual citizenship. But because that's so much, because I mean, I thought Canada was a lot like Scotland could have been, but we got immersed in parochial matters in Scotland, unfortunately. So, I mean, if you're thinking about the UK, it's a great entity, and, it just has so much soft power. All our universities are world-rated universities in England and Wales and Scotland. I don't really understand why there's a need for independence, because clearly economically we'd be far worse off. But that doesn't stop the SNP wanting independence, even though we'd be far worse off. But they're objecting to Brexit because we might be worse off under Brexit. So what's the difference? Worse off as an independent Scotland or worse off as an independent United Kingdom? I mean, this is where most of the SNP arguments just fall flat with me. And the problem is that you can't take the SNP seriously because, I mean, they're very honest. They want independence or bust. They don't care what happens to us once we're independent. All they want is independence, and that's the whole reason for them being there. The sole reason for them being there is they want independence come hell or high water. So at least they're being honest. But the trouble is, when they talk about anything else, like how to deal with Westminster and all that, they clearly will skew anything if they think they get an advantage for independence against staying in the Union. They will literally say or do anything, even though it's outright lie, misinformation, whatever. It's in their interest, because if they can get a few more people saying we want to be independent, that's the whole goal. So if they can rubbish England at all, or Westminster, and it gets them a few more votes, they'll go for it. So you cannot trust the SNP. And if you look at it, when we got all these Tory MPs voted in the last election, they managed to save us millions in VAT because we could talk to the Chancellor and we could influence things because we're on their side. None of the SNPs could do anything because they weren't trusted, essentially, and they'll never be trusted. So having an SNP MP in Westminster is a total, utter waste of time. As I said it in my own videos that I put up prior to the last election, because I said an SNP MP is a waste of your vote. And I think a lot of you obviously listened to me because so many SNP MPs lost their jobs, basically. And that was right that that should happen. Because we need, I mean, even if Scotland went independent, England's still by far the largest market we have. So if anything, you want to be hoping that the rest of the UK will do even better after Scotland got independence, because that means our market will be even more valuable to Scotland. That's why running the rest of the UK down is just stupidity in my view. And it's unfortunate that we don't have the breadth of thought coming out of Scotland these days. I mean, there's starting to be cracks in the SNP leadership, and it's about time. Because if Nicola Sturgeon goes, who do we vote in? We don't know. I mean, we maybe know John Swinney, but that's about it. Other than that, we don't know who these SNP MPs or MSPs are. We've no idea what they think or anything, because they all speak with one voice. And I tell you, under Sturgeon, we'll never get independence. That's for certain. Mark my words, that's for certain. And Nicola Sturgeon, there'll be no independent Scotland ever. Maybe in the future when new heads come in, new thinking comes in, maybe. But under her watch, no chance. And it's time that the SNP, MSP decide to speak out for themselves, give their vision of what could happen. And then there should be a leadership election under the SNP so we can pick new leaders going forward for them. And that's if you want independence. I don't, but I'm telling you this much, if I did, I think we need, I mean, I voted yes for independence, but very reluctantly, and I was only persuaded when someone I respected said, yeah, the point is once we get independence, we can then decide who we want to vote and how to run Scotland. But we'll never have that choice if we don't get independence. And so that kind of swayed me as a reluctant yeser. But I tell you, when they voted to say no to independence, I was greatly relieved. I really was. And speaking to a lot of my friends, I think they also voted yes. I think they were also rather relieved as well. So good on the people that stood firm. But as I say, United Kingdom, I mean, it's like home. All of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, it's all home to us. I mean, especially England and Wales. I'm not so much saying Northern Ireland in particular, because I've never been to Northern Ireland. And obviously we've had all the troubles there over many, many years. But certainly England and Wales, wonderful countries, wonderful people. And I mean, I love them all to death, I really do. I mean, they're wonderful people. And I'm sure a lot of the English love the Scots. But I think the SNP has I don't know, they seem to be turning some of the English against the Scots, and that's not good for the future of the country, for sure. But as I say, together as United Kingdom, and also the United Kingdom outside of Europe, I frankly think our future is amazing. I'm going to do another video of why I think that the UK is better out of the EU. So I'm not going to bother you with that. I just think, in fact, that together we can do far better outside the EU than in it. But that's a discussion for another time. But I just really wanted to say, as far as the UK is concerned, I'm very happy being in the UK as a Scot. I just say they're lovely people, lovely country. There is some gorgeous scenery, all kinds of scenery, rugged, lovely fertile land, rolling hills, trees. Some of the areas in England are just beautiful. So I mean, I encourage you, if you want to go for a holiday outside Scotland, do think of England, or Wales for that matter. I mean, beautiful scenery down there, and lovely people. And they have a great tradition of, I mean, pub life down there used to be a real pleasure, because you needed to drink yourself to death. You could just go and have 1 pint or 2, and as I say, it was Sunday lunch down in England was always a big thing. Always used to be like a joint, and or roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, roast potatoes, all this kind of good stuff. So, you know, often they went out to the pub, had a 1 or 2 pints, then came back and had their meal. So, I mean, it was a wonderful life down there, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I say, if it hadn't been for my parents being ill, I wouldn't have come back to Scotland. I'd probably been more than happy to stay down there. So anyway, as I say, I think being in part of the UK is great, and I hope you agree with me. But I just thought I'd put my thoughts to you. So thanks for listening.